Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio. Philip's actually on holiday this week. Motor Trade Radio's very own Alan Wicker is touring the west coast, I think, of Scotland. So he was packing for all eventualities because I think the weather was due to hit around the time that he set off. But I'm delighted to say we're joined this week by friend of the pod, industry guru Karl Davis. So welcome back, Karl.
Hi, Curtis. That is very kind of you to say. My sea legs have been tested this morning on one ferry over to Kirkwall, and that ferry looked small, but we're going to get on a really small ferry in a couple of hours' time. So I'm glad we're doing this podcast now, not later.
Yes. And there's certainly a Scottish theme to this week's show because you're in Scotland and Phil's in Scotland. So do look out for him.
I will do.
Now, if you haven't already caught it, then do check out our most recent supplier special, which was with John Maelli, who is the UK country manager of Swedish startup CarCare. CarCare has an automated inventory management platform, first launched in Sweden, but now being used by some of the big name UK groups. So do check that one out. Next week, when Phil's back, we'll be catching up with CAP HPI's Darren Martin for his take on how trade values performed in October, and also CAP HPI's forecast for the rest of the year. And that'll be on your podcast feed early next week. And Karl, before we start and take a look at the headlines, I think listeners will be interested to know that you're currently busy going through entries for the Motor Trader Awards because you're one of the judges. You sit on the judging panel. How's the process going?
The process is going really well. The level of entries has been tremendous. The quality of the entries, I didn't think last year's entries could be improved, but they have. And sometimes awards ceremonies get some bad rap, particularly if you self-nominate, which many of them do, including this one. But for me, the self-nomination is irrelevant. It's the calibre of the organisation and the entry and the submission, and it's really high. So it's a hard job. I'm a few more days into it. I'll be taking some time to do that whilst I'm up here, and the event is the 20th of November is the awards night. It's always a fab night. And I think there's still some tables left and some individual seats left. So if there's any listeners that haven't yet booked, it's worth it because it's an inspiring night. It really is.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, certainly when I was editing Motor Trader, it was the highlight of the year. And I did enjoy the whole judging process because you and I worked very closely together back then. And we're probably talking about 10 years or so, probably a bit more than that, actually, Karl.
It is, and it probably is 10 years, and I do worry now when my phone rings and it's your name, Curtis, because I think, what's this going to cost me? So it's a big time commitment, but actually I'm flattered to do it. I'm inspired by the entries, and do you know what? I get smarter every year reading all those entries, so it's a win-win.
Yeah, excellent. And as you say, the shortlist has been announced, and you're working your way through that shortlist, and you guys are going to be sitting down to pick the winners over the next few weeks. So, we look forward to hearing more on the 20th of November. So headlines this week come from AM, car dealer, Motor Trader and Autocar, starting with FCA compliance failing costs Volkswagen Finance £27 million. The appetite to make the switch to EVs remains strong as barriers diminish, finds new motors consumer research. Warranty Solutions Group reveals the highest warranty claims it has paid out on battery electric vehicles. This week, we've got two acquisition stories as Ancaster Group buys Allams of Epsom and long-standing UK DMS company Dragon 2000 is snapped up by a French automotive tech business. And we'll finish with news of not one, but two new Chinese brands making their UK debuts. We'll start with that story from AM Online. And the headline there is FCA compliance failing costs. Volkswagen Finance £27 million. This attracted a lot of interest at the beginning of the week, Karl. Certainly in the dealer press, but also in the national press. So, just a quick summary of what the main story is about. So, Volkswagen Finance has been slapped with a £5.4 million fine by the Financial Conduct Authority for failing to treat customers in financial distress fairly, and this dates back to January 2017. So the FCA looked at this period from 2017 to July 2023 with Volkswagen Financial Services, obviously one of the UK's largest motor finance providers, failing to properly assess and support the needs of over 110,000 customers, which the FCA said was struggling to make payments. Now, the FCA found that the company's actions put many customers, especially vulnerable ones, in even more difficult situations through failing to properly understand their personal circumstances, leading to blanket decisions being imposed. And certainly in some instances, Volkswagen Finance repossessed vehicles without considering alternative solutions, such as adjusting payment plans. And for many, this meant losing essential transport needed for work or family commitments. So, as I say, Karl, a big story, this one, and it did actually end up in the national media. There was a lot of interest in this one. What did you make of it?
I think it was eye-watering. Would be one way I'd put it. Eye-watering numbers of people affected, 110,000, over a long period of time, circa 6 years, and it made me cringe, really, Curtis, because it's the complaint that's been upheld is something that's central to dealing with customers and going about your business. And if people are struggling to make a payment and the lender is not doing, it would appear, everything possible to find a solution, I'm not surprised that the fine was so high. And I'm certainly not surprised that Volkswagen Group, put their hands up and cooperated, because, it's I've been in this industry over 40 years, and there's some things that happened 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago that I was part of, that the whole industry was part of, and I'm not proud of. And thankfully, we're in a much more regulated space now. So to have a story of this magnitude in a recent period of just a few years ago, made difficult reading. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and you do point out that Volkswagen Finance did actually put its hands up, because the piece actually says that it did face a potential fine of £7.7 million, and it's now agreed to pay over £21.5 million in compensation to customers who suffered harm. And Volkswagen Financial Services, it operates across multi-brands. It's the whole Volkswagen Group, including the likes of Porsche. So this really is a big story. And from the FSA, Therese Chambers, who's the Joint Executive Director of Enforcement, said, "For many, a car is not nice to have, but a necessity for work or for family life." And Volkswagen Finance made tough personal situations worse by failing to consider what those in difficulty might need. And she went on to say, it is right that they compensate those who suffered. This fine and redress should send a clear signal to lenders the need to properly support those in financial difficulty. And this very much is a test case. It's something that will be closely watched throughout the industry, won't it?
Yeah, definitely. And how it's happened, only the insiders will know, whether that's process, training, governance, due diligence, who knows? But what the public does know is it's only a few years ago now that Volkswagen Group were globally all over the press for a diesel cheat device. So this is really bad PR for a strong brand, and this type of calling out just can't help. So however it's happened, that much used term, there's got to be some learning from this. There has, not just for Volkswagen Group, for all of us, because it's just not good enough.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that in response to the FCA's findings, Volkswagen Finance said it has set up a redress scheme to compensate affected customers, and the company has also made significant changes to how it operates, including improving its staff training and introducing a new debt collection model aimed at offering better support to those in financial difficulties. So really touching on your point there, Karl, about processes. Okay, moving on. So the next story actually comes from Motors, the sponsors of the podcast, and this is the first press release they've issued on the back of their latest consumer insight panel research. So the headline is "Appetite to make electric switch remains strong as barriers diminish." So this is so the research. It's something that Motors have been doing for some years. It's independent research, and this wave is of 2,000 buyers, and it's really looking at their current thinking, what they're planning to do in terms of their transport needs, and when they'll be buying their next vehicle, and what that vehicle is likely to be. So this particular story is very much around the fuel choice. So EV ownership has grown to the highest level, which is 8% ever recorded by the Consumer Insight Panel. And that started, I seem to recall, from a very, very low base. And with 19% of the 2,000 buyers polled saying they expect their next car to be an EV. And that level is actually pretty consistent with previous surveys, which in itself is actually quite interesting, because you think of all the headwinds hitting EV ownership at the moment, but that level of intent, 19%, is pretty consistent. So the research found the most common barriers to buying and owning an EV have actually fallen since 2022. So although access to charging points remains the biggest concern, it has actually fallen from 44% to 39%. Range anxiety is unchanged at 34%, while cost has actually reduced from 42% to 33%. And the only area of concern that's actually increased between those two surveys is the cost of insurance, which has jumped from 8% to 16%. Now, I don't know about you, Karl, but I'm hearing an awful lot of noise and chatter out there about the insurance costs on EVs.
Yeah, I think some of it is the innovative way that the batteries are accommodated, sometimes in the floor of the car. That's a problem for speed bumps and the quality of our roads right now. The cost of battery replacement can run into the tens of £1,000s for the high performance and luxury cars. So there's challenges to overcome, but I think there's positives in this. When we actually see the consideration going up, we see the prices coming down, which is a problem if you bought one a year or two ago. But if you're considering one now, it's a great time to do so. So I think the one thing that surprises me, so I think the progress will continue. Maybe we finished with the the early adopters, and maybe we're now starting to see the early majority is starting to take shape on the back of dramatically reducing prices. But the thing that still amazes me is I see very little marketing around the cost of ownership with regards to the pence per mile. If you can charge at home, the pence per mile is amazing. And at the moment, most of that volume's been taken up by fleet and business users, where the advantage is benefit in kind. Hundreds of pounds less to have a BEV than an ICE. So I think there's an opportunity from a marketing point of view to talk even more about the cost of ownership, because that is a great news story. Whether you're into electric or not, whether you're embracing it or whether you're going to get on board kicking and screaming, it can't be denied. The cost of ownership from a pence per mile is tiny.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Carl, and certainly from my fleet days, where whole life costs were the mantra in the fleet industry. You're correct. You're not seeing that an awful lot in the retail side, and there is a case for EVs, and it's one that can be articulated through those lower running costs, with the proviso that if you can charge at home on a good tariff. And the research from Motors actually identified a group of EV rejectors. So overall, 28% said they will never buy an EV. And digging down into the demographics, these were mostly women and over 45s with household budgets, household incomes below £30,000. And it goes back to what we've said many times on the podcast, that EVs aren't for everyone. If you can't charge at home, that pretty much eliminates you from consideration. You're considering EVs. So some interesting research here, and there is more coming out over the next couple of weeks with this one. So
Yeah.
Moving on to the next story, and it is kind of linked. You'll enjoy this, Carl, because it's as though we've themed the headlines this week. Because the headline there at Motor Trader is Warranty Solutions Group reveals highest warranty claims on battery electric vehicles. So this is new research from Warranty Solutions Group, and it's revealed the highest warranty claims it has paid out over the past year. Now, the largest EV warranty claim paid by the firm between 23 and 24 was for a replacement transfer box and electric drive on an Audi e-tron Sportback Quattro, totaling an eye-watering £5,000. Now, it's actually worth heading over to Motor Trader for the story, because it's got a breakdown. It's got the top 10 by costs, and certainly the analysis. It covered 800 electric car warranty claims paid over that time frame between 2022 and October 2024. Shows that the average warranty claim for EVs are higher than comparative hybrids and ICE vehicles. So the average EV claim was £675 compared with hybrids at £633 and ICE vehicles at £482. What did you make of this, Carl?
You do love your numbers, Curtis, don't you?
Yes.
I'm surprised that the numbers weren't higher. I'm surprised that the proximity was only less than a couple of £100 between a full EV at 675 and an ICE at 482. So I was surprised at that, particularly when you consider the complexity of an EV and the fact that really the EVs haven't been out long enough to have a whole myriad of tier 2 suppliers and that are making comparable looky-likey products. So I was quite surprised in a positive way. And I was also surprised that the biggest claim was only circa £5,000, because I've seen bigger claims than that for ICE vehicles. So that didn't scare me too much.
Oh, that's very reassuring. Yeah, there's a great comment here from Steph Newbury, who's a great group director at Warranty Solutions Group, who says EVs are generally more expensive to repair than petrol or diesel vehicles for several reasons. The battery is the most expensive component in an EV, and if it needs to be replaced, the cost can be significant due to its complexity, size, and the expensive materials used within them. So it really is highlighting, the costs associated with EVs, because what we normally talk about is the sort of relatively low servicing costs of EVs and the how infrequently they need to be serviced. But it's a different matter, isn't it, when it comes to actually repairing them?
Yeah, it's a good point that you made there about the servicing costs. I've got a good friend that used to have an SUV brand that no longer trades, and he's heavily into ICE, and he really misses that expensive oil that he used to put into those big lumpy engines. So it's no surprise that the cost has come down. Yeah, I think it's an interesting story. I got educated from that story actually, which is always good when every day is a school day. I didn't realise that rapid charging, which comes back to your point, Curtis, is that if you can't charge at home, you've got a rapid charge, on the
Yeah.
motorway, for example. It's damned expensive, and that corrupts the battery. That
Yes.
wears the battery out more quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's obvious to more techie people than me. And I didn't also realise that warm weather environments wears a battery out sooner. Didn't imagine that for 1 minute.
Yeah.
So, a battery in California is going to last less than half as long as a battery in a cold climate. That seems to be counterintuitive to my simple thinking, but that seems to be the case.
Well, we've managed to educate you this week on the podcast, Carl. That's always good.
And my teachers back in the day said, "You'll make no good, Davis. You'll make no good."
So we'll be back with the rest of the week's headlines after the break.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are on your podcast feed.
So, as I said at the top of the show, we've got a couple of acquisition stories. So we'll start with car dealer. The headline is Ancaster Group adds Skoda to list of manufacturer partners with acquisition of Allams of Epsom. So this is very much in my part of the world, Carl, the deep south. And it's certainly two businesses that I'm aware of. Ancaster Group, very, very well established. In fact, they're both very well established businesses based in that South London and Surrey territory. So they've acquired Allams of Epsom, and strategically, what was particularly interesting in this story is that it gives Ancaster a foothold into the Skoda brand for the first time. And, as a group, Ancaster currently represents Nissan, Hyundai, MG, Renault, Dacia, and Genesis. So it's, as I say, it gives them a debut with Skoda, but also the Volkswagen Group. And it does follow a number of stories that Philip and I have been reporting on in recent weeks, where a bigger group has acquired a single site, really to get closer to that brand, to add that brand to their portfolio. And this is another example of it. And it is a good fit. So Stephen Wood, managing director of Ancaster Group, said this acquisition is a strategic milestone for us as it accelerates our growth and broadens the brands we offer in South London and Surrey.
Yeah, I'm not totally surprised by that. I think Skoda's a cracking brand. I've always been a big fan of Skoda, and I think Seat, I suppose, soon to trade solely as Cupra, again is another good brand. So I think it's a smart move. I think it's also a smart move that there's going to be no name change at that particular site. because as you said, Curtis, it's traded for a long time and it's got good core values. So, best of luck to them.
Yep, definitely. And the next acquisition, the second acquisition of the week, the story comes from AM Online, and it is Dragon 2000 sale to Lacour strengthens position in DMS market. So this is quite an unusual one, and we were talking about this before we started recording because it's an example of a French-based business called Lacour Group buying a UK business, Dragon 2000, and you and I couldn't remember a French company buying a UK company in the automotive sector before, could we?
No, I can't. I've really scratched my head ready for this conversation, and our listeners will undoubtedly spot one or two examples we've forgotten. But it is unusual. I think it's encouraging too, and I think Dragon's been a bit of a dark horse, really, because I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but it doesn't seem to have a big footprint in the press and from a PR point of view. But it has got 1,000 users, including Williams Group, which I do respect and admire. So it's an interesting one to watch, I think, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do remember Dragon 2000, certainly from my Motor Trader days. So I mean, their strength really is in the DMS market, but they also build websites for car dealers, and they build mobile apps. So yeah, very much involved in that sort of tech space. And Lacour Group, who are buying them, they're very much a specialist in automotive after sales in that particular sector. And it's been around for a long time. So Lacour Group was founded in 1985. And I think Dragon 2000, they've been around since 1995. So two very well-established companies here. And there's a great quote from Mark Cooper, who's the founder and managing director of Dragon 2000, who says, joining forces with Lacour is an exciting accomplishment for Dragon 2000. Our shared vision of providing leading after-sales software solutions to the automotive sector makes this partnership a natural fit. And that's very much echoed by Lacour Group, who say the acquisition is a major step forward for the business, enabling entry into the dynamic UK market. And they go on to say, we're excited about the opportunity to grow our presence and introduce our innovative solutions to a wider audience. So there's potential here for this expanded company to really grow in the UK, isn't there?
Yeah, and it was really timely. It did make me chuckle that David Kendrick and his team are at it again. He's only barely got his feet under the table at Cooper Parry now, having sold the business, and he's got a deal over the line. So he is a deal maker, isn't he? He's been around a long time, and boy, that guy can do some business.
Yeah. So moving on, last two stories, they are closely related because they're about Chinese brands making their debut in the UK, which also is a familiar theme on the Motor Trade Radio podcast, because it is something that we do return to on a regular basis. So the two stories that caught my eye, the first one is from Autocar, and the headline there is Xpeng G6 to be launched in the UK in a matter of weeks. Now, how's that for some urgency? So it's a great story, this one. It's written by Nick Gibbs, and it comes from the Paris Motor Show. So it looks as though Nick did actually sit down with Xpeng to find out what their plans are for Europe and the UK. And he quotes them as saying that they will launch in the UK in less than a handful of months, as it works to expand its lineup to include right-hand drive cars. And this is all based on comments from Brian Gu, who's one of the co-founders of the business. So Xpeng had previously said the UK was on its list of European markets that it planned to enter in 2024, but it had gone very quiet about its plans in recent months. But it looks as though it's been encouraged by the government saying this week that it wouldn't follow the EU and raise tariffs on Chinese-built EVs. So it is actually accelerating that launch into the UK. What did you make of this one?
Several things. So the point about the UK government not imposing additional levies, I'm not surprised that they signposted that. And I sort of yo-yo on that whole topic of whether we should or we shouldn't. And I probably fall on the side of we shouldn't, because at the end of the day, the market's got to set the price, and the consumer will decide. But then I do sort of, roll my eyes a little bit when I read about how much state support the Chinese car brands are getting to actually develop their global footprint. So, big statement when in the article they talk about a brand to rival Tesla, and they've actually taken some styling cues from Tesla, which surprises me, because I think, in my humble opinion, that design cue is starting to look a bit dated. But I think Tesla in particular have got some work on their hands. They're certainly not having it all their own way, and I would predict that their share price will go down, but only time will tell. But I think out of all the lineup that we saw in that article, the P7 Saloon is a really handsome car. So, let's wait and see.
Yeah, and with the P7 Saloon, it could be a European car, and you and I have talked about this before, that the Chinese brands that we're seeing entering the UK now pretty much have the design nailed down. They're not introducing cars that look out of place. And looking at this photograph of the P7, which, as you say, is a very smart looking car, it could be a Peugeot, it could be a Citroen, it could be an Audi. It looks the part, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can remember representing Volvo as a dealer, then a field person, and 30 years ago, even Volvos you had to buy with your head. You certainly didn't buy them with your heart. And these new entries, as you say, they're just hitting the ground running from a styling point of view, and I think they should be applauded for that.
So the final story this week, and it's continuing that theme, heading over to AM Online. The headline is "Opportunities for Smaller Dealers as China's Skywell Reaches the UK Car Market." This is very much a follow-up to certainly a story that Philip and I spoke about probably earlier this year. Skywell, it's an interesting brand. So it's a Chinese brand that's being imported into the UK through Innovation Automotive, which was a new setup based in Cirencester, which also imports DFSK, the light commercial vehicles. And it did win the import and distribution franchise for Skywell. There's no timeline on this particular story, so we don't know when they'll be launching, but the fact that they'll be at Automotive Management Live next month is a pretty clear statement that they will be wanting to talk to dealers. And indeed, what they're doing at the moment is they're out and about in the UK. They're talking to dealers, but very much focused on sort of local dealers, small dealer groups, rather than the big national names.
And that's a really good observation. And that was a typical way of a new entrant coming to the market, back in the day. And I suppose it's very easy to get sort of complacent now when brands like BYD, Omoda, etc., come and they can bag all the big dealers and some of the best operators. And these guys seem to be taking almost a tier 2 approach to the smaller groups, independent dealers, maybe the mom and pop shops, which in years gone by was a typical route into a market. So they're definitely going to have some recruiting sergeants at AM on Live, aren't they? And I'm sure they'll get some interest.
Yeah, and their approach reminded me, and I'm old enough to remember when Kia launched in the UK, and indeed SsangYong, and their approach seems to be very similar to what those brands did, 20 plus years ago now, when they were very much talking to those local dealers and indeed independent dealers, non-franchise dealers, and just growing the brand very, very slowly and going for that local market, rather than sort of mass market. So certainly a brand to watch. And if you are going to Automotive Management Live next month, then make a beeline for them, because I think there's going to be some interesting stuff coming out of them.
You've got me thinking now, Curtis. I suppose the big difference 20 or 30 years ago was when the new brands came in. They came in with reheated, lukewarm, rebadged former product from other brands. I remember, the Lada was a reheated Fiat. I think the small Kia was a reheated Mitsubishi or something like that. So these days it's a much more dynamic approach with, as you've said repeatedly, cutting edge designs and some good fit and finish. You don't have to have one of these new brands and compromise on style necessarily, which is again another sort of warning shot to the established, almost indigenous sort of brands that have held massive market share for so long. And if you look at Ford and Vauxhall, those two big players just a decade or so ago, that's no longer the case.
Yeah, and in fact, that's something that we do look at on a monthly basis, because we look at the new car sales figures, and in the past, Ford and Vauxhall would be 1 and 2 pretty much every month, but now they're really dropping down the rankings as some of these emergent brands are coming in and moving up the rankings. So yeah, all changed. So Karl, we've covered a lot of ground this week, from FCA compliance to EV buying trends, acquisitions, and new Chinese brands. So I hope you enjoyed your co-hosting spot.
Privileged to help out, so thanks, Curtis. Yeah.
No, many thanks for coming back on. Always enjoy catching up with you, and thanks for sitting in for Philip this week. But that's very much all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And of course, goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.